go. Okay, so here we are. Um, Yes, so we have our Taste Canada presents a Canadian beef cut-along with Chef Mathieu Paré in Calgary from the Canadian Beef Centre of Excellence. So we're thrilled to have everybody here with us today. And cutting along, we have Top Tukes. So I'm going to ask you to just say hi and let us know what you're working with today.
Hello, it's us here at Top Tukes in Kitchener, Ontario, and we're going to be following along today with the fry tip as well as the flank steak.
Great.
And we're looking forward to it. Quite excited.
Awesome. We're so glad to have you. And we have Chef Patrick from Fanshawe. And I believe we also have a crew from Fleming today. And we have our George Brown students watching. So welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I am going to hand it over to Chef Mathieu.
Thank you, Sabrina. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Sweet. Okay, welcome to Canada Beef, everyone. We thought we'd start here at the entrance to our office based here in Calgary, Alberta. And I thought it would be neat to just give you a quick glance through our facility, the Canadian Beef Centre of Excellence, as we take our station and do the presentation. Today we'll have a presentation which will be slides based. That will we will go through that in a fairly short amount of time, but it is really a very important part of learning about what Canadian beef offers in terms of advantages as a cook, as a chef, and in the marketplace for domestic and also for export. We call that the Canadian beef advantage, and I'll kind of precisely note some points for you to remember in terms of your culinary development as students and as professionals moving on. So my sous chef here, Yoshi, she is manning the camera until we get to the kitchen, and then you'll see the equipment that we have there. So follow me, please, right this way. This is the official entrance to the Canadian Beef Centre of Excellence. So nice to welcome you to our facility virtually. We look forward to seeing you here one day in person. But until then, this is really starting to look like an awesome way to share what we have in terms of capability in building resources, particularly video resources. I'll take a quick peek in here. This is our consumer culinary studio. So we built this very recently, a renovation that took place over the past year. This used to be one big open room. We enclosed it so that we could continuously produce consumer culinary videos here. Into the larger space, kind of a classroom setting, where we've now definitely invested in building audiovisual technology and equipment to support learning like this today. So we're really excited about it. To be honest, this is one of our first virtual engagements since we've updated the facility. This actually references an area just behind our commercial culinary studio, which is the space here. And we currently are doing videos for food service in that space right now, working with cuts, as we will present here today as well. Now we're looking here at our commercial culinary studio, a commercial kitchen that we transformed into a studio. This was part to do with just the importance of communicating through video now. And then also, of course, the challenges we faced during the COVID pandemic, and when we used to interact here in person with our partners, we needed to find another way to do it. And this was obviously the option, which as students and as instructors, you're very familiar with this. And so we took the challenge head on. You'll see cameras, box cameras. These are for our close-ups of product. We also have pan, tilt, zoom cameras, which will catch the presenters as well. We'll come around into the space on this side. And then you'll notice too, we've got a handy monitor there, so I can see my placement of product. Yoshi, I'm just looking at that monitor up there. I know you'll catch it. That's perfect. All right, and then you're back here into the backstage view of the little facility. So as I mentioned, we're going to get started on a presentation that I will share quickly, but I'm going to highlight the key points about what we call the Canadian beef advantage. And I think that Sabrina has that presentation handy, and we'll get into that right now. So this is really an awesome absolutely excellent opportunity for us. We appreciate so much this opportunity to partner with Cooks the Books and to get into a presentation. What I'm going to share with you is what we refer to as the Canadian Beef Advantage. And what's important, I think, for students, I'm not going to use my mouse. I don't need to because Sabrina's advancing the slides. So when it comes to Canadian beef, we're very fortunate in Canada. We have such awesome producers, 60,000 or so producing beef farming families, ranchers across Canada. They've been looking after our land, you know, as part of their commitment to the natural resources, and also, of course, it's a commitment to raising healthy animals. Healthy animals produces great beef and safe beef, and so that's the foundation of our industry in a lot of ways. And then from there, at the farm level, that's where the processing sector takes the ownership of the product and processes it for food safety, ensuring for that animal health, using third-party regulators that are governed by our federal government, and those safeguards in place to ensure for food safety, which at the end of the day is basically, you know, the most important factor in terms of consumption and trade, and the importance of the economics of beef in Canada. So after we look after healthy land, healthy animals, and food safety, then we get into the grading standards, which in turn delivers a beef quality, which is the experience that the consumer is going to get at the end of the day at their family table or in a restaurant environment where they're going to enjoy the premium attributes of Canadian beef, which we will explore in a little bit more detail now. We talked about the healthy animals and the healthy herd, and so you'll notice I've highlighted the ear tag in this animal pictured here. That's a radio frequency identification device. And so we are able to, in Canada, and it's quite a unique system to Canada, is track those animals from their birth farm all the way to the final days at the processing facility. And that way, if there is an occurrence or a concern around animal health, we can trace that animal back to its original herd to ensure that any contact has been addressed. So that really has been something that has set Canada apart since the introduction of the program, because it's not a widespread utilized system across the world, and Canada was one of the first countries to implement this system across the country. Talking a little bit more about food safety, and of course that you're very familiar with this as culinary students and instructors in the trade. Food safety and the hazard analysis critical control point system is a mandatory system, and it's implemented across federally inspected meat processing facilities across Canada. And so that system that we can count on in terms of those processes, that they are done in a hygienic manner, that any animals that appear to be ill, sick, or whatever are not introduced to the food chain for human consumption. So that is the regulatory that is governed by the federal government through the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And so that also sets us apart as a nation that produces high quality beef, but also safe beef, which is super important to us in terms of our exports, which is really important for our economics here in Canada. When we talk a little bit more specifically about Canadian Beef Advantage, what we're essentially talking about is high quality beef advantage. In Canada, you know, for folks, and I imagine that some of you in the audience here today have enjoyed beef from other countries, and all beef is good beef. It's super rich in nutrients, and it is dense in protein, and so it delivers, you know, no matter what the quality, a very nutritious eating experience. But when we talk about the actual attributes which lend to juiciness and flavor and tenderness, Canada is uniquely positioned because of our cold climate. And so when I work in international markets, and when I try to draw a connection to what makes Canadian beef great, it's a really easy connection to make to our cold climate, because everybody knows Canada is a cold country. Do one of these, everybody's like, oh yeah, I've heard of Canada, it's always cold there. And so we can attribute our excellent beef to the cold climate. And the cold climate really delivers consistency. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more in detail, but here, you know, a couple of images and a couple of notes on our abundant water supply, which is a huge treasure here in Canada, our amazing wide open spaces, our abundance of feed grains, the rich food source that we can quickly develop and grow our cattle to high quality and yielding carcasses that are able to deliver that excellent eating experience, that tenderness, but also because of the rich grain feeding that we are able to do, we bring those animals to harvest quicker. Between 16 and 24 months of age, these animals have been processed and now is food that we can consume. So a lot less inputs, water, fuel, all those costs, but also resources to build the products. And finally, cold winters here in Canada. Cold winters act as a natural barrier for disease, insects, things that are a bug to the beef animal. So with our cold winter, we knock out a lot of those challenges that those cattle would face in hotter climates. So we're talking about the northern temperate zone, and so I've highlighted this on this sort of weather map that I found. I forwarded it from the internet, and just to point out that cold climate consistency. And as you look further south and through the US and down into Mexico, that's where you introduce a hotter climate and different challenges for beef producers. Those challenges are addressed with different breeds. In Canada, because we are a cold climate, we have super consistency because only a cold climate breed will perform here. And it just so happens that the cold climate breeds, which have originated from Europe, are the highest, offer the highest palatability, the greatest potential for marbling. They were actually developed for beef in the first place, rather than being a milk animal or a working animal. And so those genetics that we brought from Europe that work well here in this cold climate are exclusively used. When we compare that with our neighbors to the south, then we have introduction of different types of genetics. A quick look here, what the differentiation here in the genetics. On the left, you see the Bos taurus animal. On the right, you see the Bos indicus animal. You can see definitely some variances here in the actual conformation of the animal. And so with the Bos taurus, you have a really consistent animal shape, and you'll have really consistent muscle shapes too. You have the lack of the hump. You have a really solid and consistent build. And I'll probably say consistent 101 times in this presentation, but it's super important as chefs. You're developing this understanding of product, and you're developing your understanding of consistency and what you deliver to that customer on a plate in a food service environment. Consistency is key. And so when we can rely on the Bos taurus genetics, these animals that came from Europe originally, from the UK, from British breeds like this Angus here, these are the animals that produce that excellent high quality beef. And these are the only types of genetics that we have here in Canada. Those Bos indicus genetics, those are very useful in the hotter climates. So in the hotter climates, those animals, they come from a hotter climate originally. So they're used to some of those pests and some of those challenges, but they don't offer the same kind of quality eating attributes that the Bos taurus genetics do. 2/3 of our herd here is basically a cross between a Hereford Angus, but depending on the producer, they introduce other breeds like Limousin and Simmental, and what the Canadian beef producers have done is using those genetics from Europe. They've combined the best to grow larger size and also high quality eating experience. We spoke briefly about the high energy feed grains. So this is really a key to Canadian beef quality. We've followed our neighbors to the south, and in the US, the US is our largest customer for Canadian beef products. And so it was a pretty natural progression to offer our American cousins down there a product that they are familiar with. And so our beef industry is very, very closely linked and very closely resembles their industry, aside from what I mentioned as far as the genetics, where in those hotter climates, they have the introduction of those Bos taurus. But the feed grains is key. And I mentioned earlier, it helps bring those animals to market at a younger age, and a younger animal is going to offer a more tender eating experience. and tenderness is a super highly desirable attribute of beef. Quick look here at the grading system. We're going to look at it once more in a chart, but I wanted to show you here how it works. Basically, in this flow chart, we see on the left the youthful carcass. So now we're talking about federally inspected Canadian beef, and so those are plants that can ship beef interprovincially between Alberta, Saskatchewan, Prince Edward Island, all the way across the country, and also for export. So that's what we're talking about, Canada's quality grades. So to be a Canada quality grade, the animal must be young, under 30 months of age. And we talked about that importance in terms of that eating experience. And that's one of our advantages. Because of that grain feeding, we can get those animals to market sooner. They are younger, more tender, more juicy, more delicious. Now we move down the flow chart here. Once they qualify as under 30 months of age, young animal, then we start to eliminate those carcasses that show deficiencies. Excessively masculine. A mature bull does not eat as well as a young steer or heifer. So now the mature masculine carcasses are removed. They're just going to be tough. Mature masculinity is shown with a big hump. It's clear when a bull comes through, it's not going to make the grade. They get removed out, kicked out. Now we go to the next qualification, dark cutting carcass. I'll show you a picture of some of that later in just a moment. Dark cutters, undesirable. They don't present well at retail, and also they have some deficiencies in terms of shelf life. They get kicked out. Then we take out the carcasses with yellow fat. Yellow fat tends to be attributed to older animals or animals that have spent more time in pasture, and so they've had a chance to sort of develop more color, and because of age, they're going to show different coloration in that fat. We remove the carcasses with yellow fat. Then looking further ahead, any carcasses that don't show that muscle firmness, that nice cuttable quality, if they are saggy, lacking that nice firmness, they get kicked out. And any carcasses that don't show marbling, they're not going to make it to those quality A grades. So as you can see, we've taken our pool of eligible carcasses and we've reduced it down and down and down until we have our A grades. Quick look here at what those A grades look like and also how they're labeled. We start at AA here. Of course, there is A grade available, but in the food service environment, A grade is fairly lean, doesn't really offer those premium attributes that we're going to explore and talk about here in terms of quality beef. It definitely has its place though. So going from AA on the left, we have then Canada AAA grade. And then something to note here, the Canada AAA top tier. So the specialty programs that you're probably familiar with that are offered by the major packers, and also, of course, some specialty smaller packers too, but their premium products, their premium programs, I should say, are a selection that is based on a criteria that they set that takes from the AAA like a reserve. And so some of that high quality material out of AAA, that's reserved for their specialty programs. So when you're talking about offering a really premium eating experience in a restaurant environment and you want to offer the best of the best, your two choices there are going to be that prime grade, which is quite dear. It takes a lot of quality to achieve that prime grade, and there's a small pool of it. And then so that top tier AAA is really a sweet spot in terms of what the processors can offer in terms of that excellent eating experience. All right, I'm going to push through the last couple of slides here. This one, a comparison. So when we talk about Canada versus the United States, I mentioned how important trade is between our two countries. Canada is absolutely a major supplier for beef to the US. More than, I think, 60% of what we export is destined for the United States. So they consume a lot of our beef. They appreciate it. I remember one time I got a call from somebody, hey, I've got a box of Canadian beef here. I want to know how I can get more of it. I didn't really have a great answer for that person at the time. I was new to the job, but that's how much they appreciate and love our beef. And why? Because our grading system is more demanding. And so I talked about how we kick out those deficiencies. So if you look quickly at this table, and usually I start from left to right, but we've already kind of covered a little bit the importance of marbling, and you know it already. Starting from right and going left, meat texture, muscling, fat color, meat color, maturity, and finally marbling. marbling scores are aligned. That's the conversation around quality and eating experience. Does your beef have flecks of fat in it? Yes. Okay, great. Those align well. In the other categories, that's where we differentiate because of our Canadian beef advantage, because of our system, because of our cold climate advantage. We have a requirement for firm texture only, muscling that is good or better. No yellow fat is permitted. Bright red meat color only, and youthful animals only. And if you have a quick comparison below and look at those characteristics from the US, they don't control it to the same level and to the same degree of scrutiny that we do. And what is the benefit for us? Well, the challenge actually is that it's a little bit harder to make the grade because we're pulling away some of those that would otherwise possibly qualify based on marbling score. But what you do get is consistency with that meat texture, the muscling, the fat color, meat color, and the maturity, that tender animal that eats well. So that's how we differentiate ourselves from the US. And that's why when we get the call from the US and say, hey, I want to get more of this beef, because they can tell the difference. Next slide, please. When I was in, my other picture didn't come through here, but that's totally fine because I had two. When I was in Manila, I did a presentation to the World Chefs Federation. I did a 7-course beef tasting. And the day before, I was there and did a presentation similar to this about Canadian beef advantage, and I talked about some of these attributes. And the next day, we're in the kitchen producing the menu, and one of the chefs who was working in the butchery next door comes running over. He says, Chef, I guess he was a butcher. Chef, is this a dark cutter? And I was looking at it, I was like, is this? And I've never really seen this before because we don't have it here. But this was US beef. This was a tray of US beef. Of course, they export it all over the world just like we do. But here we are showing dark cutters in process at a hotel in Manila. I thought it was really cool. I took pictures of his tenderloins, and now I use it in presentation. You know, there's the other picture. So there they are. You can see them. Dark cutting beef doesn't merchandise as well, of course, at retail, has lower shelf life, and because of the lower shelf life, you just can't age it as well. And with age, produces off flavors. And finally, this is important because we're going to look at 3 cuts today that are relatively, they're referred to as thin meats, or they're small cuts of beef. They are not the most tender cuts on the carcass. They do actually offer quite good tenderness, but we refer to them as opportunity cuts. And so you're going to learn about these opportunity cuts, and it's our job here at Canada Beef to support your understanding of these opportunities with beef. So what's important in this slide here is the value of aging. And aging is costly because they have to store the product at cold temperatures for an extended period of time. This graph shows you that at 14 days, that's where we're starting to see most of the effects of tenderness in aging. As we progress, you see that the course of that line there, that's going to go towards points of flavor development, so increase of flavor development. But in terms of tenderness, really important. Make sure that the products that you're getting, like the ones that we're going to see today, have had a chance to get that age. Buy from a reputable seller, choose quality product with good marbling, and AAA grade is excellent for that. Make sure they're well aged. Very important characteristic. If you ever have a chance to eat underaged beef, do so as an experience for yourself, just to understand what that difference is and how that effective tenderness improves the flavor. And I think we are now promoting some of our other resources. Like I showed you, we've got videotaping happening here. We're doing some food service recovery videos. We're doing a really cool wholesale product video catalog so that we can provide chefs with the tools to how to process something like what we're going to show here in person. But we will have videos to show that. We also do already have videos. There are 2 websites here, canadabeef.ca and cdnbeefperforms.ca. Canada Beef is our consumer-facing website, so consumer recipes. There's tons of them. They're excellent. Go there and try it out. And then cdnbeefperforms.ca. That's the trade site. So for chefs, for operators, for butchers, if you want information and videos how to process, and also we have courses on the Canadian beef production system. They're available there as well. Keep in touch with us, and also I will try to get these links, or maybe Sabrina will share them towards the end of the presentation. The final slide here, I'm going to share something really cool. We had a chance to work while we were building our new facility here, and sort of an inspiration around our ability to build video work. The Canadian Beef Information Gateway is a new resource for consumers, which will soon evolve into a resource that also faces industry, butchers and chefs. And so in its current form, the user scans a code and enters into a gateway of information that is offered to them specifically for the product that they're scanning. So now at consumer level in retail store, they can access our videos, our recipes, our nutritional information, grading system information, all that right through the QR code. Soon, we will have this QR code system in place so that a professional trade user can scan a code on a box or package of beef in a wholesale format and access resources that are developed specifically for those users, like I talked about that we're doing in our meat lab today. Thanks so much for paying attention to this very important part, what we call the Canadian Beef Advantage. I hope it was useful for you. And I want to just stress here, as a chef, speaking to chefs and future culinary professionals, your understanding of product and its positioning and how, I gotta say, how important it is for you to understand the attributes and what makes products great, because it's up to you and your teams to express that with the customers to help build the value of the product. And Canadian beef delivers tenderness, juiciness, flavor, but it's our job to communicate that in advance. Yoshi, let's start with a tri-tip, please. Okay, tri-tip, our first cut of the day. And we'll do the cutting in 20 minutes total. So we're gonna go pretty fast. What we aim to do here today is show you some of the basic techniques for cutting, understand these cuts quite a little bit more in depth for some of their attributes, and share a few ideas of how they can be processed. These are cuts that are relatively unfamiliar for most audiences. Until I started with Canada Beef years ago, I was as a professional chef, I was working in the trade, and I was relatively unfamiliar with these at that point. So it's taking me some time. You have an advantage here. You get to see them presented from us. So I took some time this morning to prepare them a little bit in advance. What I'd like to show you here, though, is a tri-tip. The tri-tip comes from the loin primal. It is from the bottom sirloin butt, the butt. And it is also called the tri-tip. All these products, of course, are muscles generally, single muscles now because we've had some ability to muscle profile. And here we go, centering a bit better. Thank you, Yoshi, is best. So the tri-tip from the bottom sirloin. I've left this one in the package. I wanted to show you a little bit the different specifications. All the cuts, it can be confusing. They all have so many different names. The tri-tip, also known as the Santa Maria steak, because it came from an area in California called the Santa Maria Valley. But they all have a Latin name. The Latin names don't change between the cuts. So that's a really good reference when you're trying to communicate with somebody who sells beef, what cut you're talking about. There's also a number associated with each product and also the particular specification. So this here is a tri-tip. This would be the 185. The 185 is the code that's used in North America, whether it's US here or in Canada. And so the 185 in this form has its fat on there. I took the fat off this morning just to give us a bit more time to work with, but you can see a couple things about it. There's a pretty good amount of it on this 185. And then we're going to look at now a little more closely, the 185. The 185D, denuded. So it's been addressed. That fat has been removed. I removed it. Yoshi, will you grab me a piece of that white fat just for a sec? I think it's in the bowl down below. Just below there, yeah. I'll just take a nice piece. So I trimmed a little bit of this fat here today. And so, there was a good fair amount. And so I took it off. One of the really things that you can do with fat is not waste it. There's a fair bit of trim sometimes in the professional kitchen. We end up with fat. So we started to think about what can we do with the fat? And we started making rendered beef fat. And we started to incorporate in any dish that, of course, is a beef-based dish where beef is on the menu, or even other meat dishes. And then also in the pastry kitchen, we started making cakes and cookies with the beef fat. And so with the price of, some of the vegetable oils and those prices increasing because of, world situation, there's awesome fat available at your fingertips in that processing. Render it out slowly at a low temperature, and you've got a beautiful product to work with. Chill it down, freeze it, and use it in all kinds of preparations. Whip it into butter, replace it in your pastry, and just identify it on the menu that there is beef fat. Celebrate the fact that you're sustainably repurposing some of these trim products. So the tri-tip, for those of us cutting along, we're going to cut along slowly, kind of together, and we are going to pay most of our attention here, specifically to the tri-tip. We removed, I'm pretty sure that you guys have also a denuded version. If you don't, then there's a bit of work to do to clean some of that fat off. Kind of what I did here this morning, just to get a little bit of that trim. Use the knife that you feel comfortable with. This is the knife that I went to school with. I know it's got a yellow handle, but I use it for beef. It's basically exclusively used for beef. But I'm comfortable with it. I use a nice flexible tip, get underneath some of that little bit of remaining fat. And if you guys are following along and this is working well for you, then great. I imagine that you probably have it to this point. And so we will continue from here. A little bit of connective tissue membrane. In my fine dining days, I was really, kind of trained to remove every last bit of this stuff. I think a lot of times it'll cook out and be quite palatable too. But with some of these cuts, it's important to remove some of the thicker pieces like that one there that I just pulled off. The tri-tip came from California, it comes from the beef animal, but it was first sort of coined as the tri-tip down there. It was a chef butcher. I think he was a butcher actually. Apparently he worked for a Safeway store, and this can be traced back to him, but it's become super popular in the US. What they do with it down there is usually roast it whole or grilled. I think in California they use red oak, and they'll just take like a basic rub. So that's really what we could do at this point if we were just using this one. We could take a basic rub. They put garlic, they put salt, black pepper, and rosemary. Some people also will marinate. In terms of marination, I usually steer a little bit light in terms of marinating high quality beef. I like the flavor profile of beef. I don't like to introduce too much acid or sweetness myself, preferring to put it on afterwards as a sauce or as a chimichurri or something like that, and this works great for that. Let's take an important look here at grain direction. And so this is the main challenge with tri-tip, is that there's a grain direction that runs here, and there's a grain direction that runs here. And they're close, they're similar, but if I started to prepare this and cut it, let's say I roasted it whole, and I worked my way this way because I thought it looked a lot like a tenderloin, and it does. And so I'd work my way this way, I would cut steaks, and then suddenly I encounter that I'm cutting steaks in the same direction as the grain. And that's not good. As we know, that grain is gonna, that length of grain is gonna prevent a tender mouthfeel, a tender eating experience, and we're not doing the tri-tip justice in that case. So a really easy way to address that, this one is tri-tipped, yeah. So after it roasts, some people will just understand that you've got 3 tips, start at the top tip here, and then carve it that way, and you'll address the grain. I like to take it maybe one step further, and I'll separate, and let's make this cut together. Separate at the bottom of the boomerang here, and following that sort of natural fat seam, we're gonna separate these two so that we can isolate that grain direction. Now we have 2 pieces. One piece, grain direction running this way, and another piece. Thank you, Yoshi. And another piece, grain direction running this way. So now we can address this as 2 separate roasts, which would work awesome. Tri-tip is really great in sous vide, but it doesn't need to be sous vide cooked to be very enjoyable. You can see beautiful marbling. This is a super juicy cut. I find it like really delivers in juiciness, and in the research that I've done online, everybody says make sure that you rest it properly. I've never seen so much attention to the resting. Let's continue. Let's make some medallion steaks. Tri-tip steaks. There's another steak we'll cut out of this one. Also, I'll save that information for in a moment. So again, back in the fine dining days, you know, I would cut here and start here to make my beautiful medallions of tri-tip. But right now, I feel like as much as we can get on the plate, customers will be happy. Keep the price a little bit lower. You there, Yoshi? Yeah. Keep the price a little bit lower, use more of it. So now be careful just to trim a minimum amount. I've got a little piece there. Those are good for tastings, for your chefs in the kitchen. And then I'm gonna make a tri-tip steak medallion here. Another steak medallion here. There we go, tri-tip steak medallions. And it can be tied up. You can tie this to get a little bit more of a shape. And you can see beautiful marbling attributes there. We're also going to try a little bit different technique and show you, use a little bit bigger knife. I like to use a scimitar here. You can try something more of like a thin cut. Try that along with us here for the cut along. A thin cut that you can quickly sear or cook as like a yakiniku, thin sliced offering. Yakiniku is like Japanese style. So you see, I made my medallions, and then I went to the center, which is a little bit easier to cut those 5mm-ish slices of tri-tip. And we can see some really beautiful marbling there. These eat awesome. The important thing when working with cuts that are unfamiliar and maybe less tender than, you know, tenderloin, ribeye, strip loin, is the awareness. And we talked about that earlier. You know, you have to present this as a different cut of beef for customers. And we know in food service how important offering new and exciting things is to our guests. And so to have them understand opportunities that they will enjoy a new cut of beef that offers beautiful marbling, that has great mouthfeel, that is juicy, awesome flavor. This is the important things you need to communicate with them as you prepare them to enjoy a steak of a tri-tip or, you know, a thin slice cut. There. Okay. And now I'll cut one more medallion here. That end piece. So in the food service environment, you know, this process, I'm kind of showing you a few specifications or ways to use the product. You know, in food service, you would probably prepare it all in the same way, but I want to show you a little bit of variety here. I'm going to make some room. I'm going to put this here. We're going to take a look at it again, and I'm going to merchandise that just so. Now we can go over here to the other piece we reserved. The other piece of the tri-tip, we identified that grain direction. We cleaned it up on both sides. Take a little bit more of that connective tissue out. A lot of that will sear off or sear and be quite edible. But if there's a little bit more of the heavier connective tissue, we're just going to make sure to address that a little bit. The rest of it, I think, is acceptable. Now we've got our tri-tip. Avoid trimming anything unnecessarily. Now I'm going to cut a steak against that grain direction running here, cut my steak here. This is a steak that's referred to as Newport steak. They call it a Newport steak in the US. And so for like a lunch option, or even a nice like light dinner, they're just super delicious. They're easy to cut, easy to merchandise and present. And you get 3 nice tri-tip steaks here that you can offer your customers something a little bit different. Very minimal trim. Put that in our little trim pile. And we've got some beautiful tri-tip steaks there. So we've created medallions. We've created a thin slice product. We've created also our beautiful Newport steaks. And you can see how, you know, people along the way have come up with all kinds of names for these products. Refer back to the number and refer back to the Latin names to make sure you're getting what you want. When I talked about the whole tri-tip earlier on, it was part of actually my on board. I guess it was my qualifying, my, what do you call it, like my tryouts for the job here. And they wanted Canada Beef asked me to prepare a presentation about cuts and opportunities for cuts. And so I chose the tri-tip. And the research that I'd done was like, the research that I did was, you know, the whole roast with tapered ends. You can roast it. We've got a little bit of background noise. I appreciate you guys getting totally engaged in this. I don't want to interrupt you. Thank you. So then I presented the tri-tip, and the way that it's tapered on two ends, I'll show you again. The way that it's tapered on two ends, point here, point there. I called this the crowd pleaser. I called it the crowd pleaser because the two ends. So you have a tapered end here and a tapered end there. And if you roast the whole thing, those who like well done, medium well, medium, can all have their preferred doneness out of the tri-tip. And then get into the middle, and then you're getting into your medium rare and rare centerpiece. And so the crowd pleaser is the roast that you can bring to the table in a food service environment. You know, talk about sorry, I'm getting a call on my phone, but it's distracting. I don't think you can hear it. Talk about something that you can share and present as a family style preparation. Okay, Yoshi, let's go to flank steak, please. All right. Take this one. Beautiful. Okay, we've got a flank steak. For you guys cutting along, hopefully you are you're with me here and we're on track. I'm going to take some time here to address the flank steak. So the flank steak is from the primal flank. It's actually not a steak, really. I would probably say this is actually like more of a roast, a big roast, and a flat meat. So this is from the abdominal section, lower part of the animal, sort of near the belly. It is also, it is, like I mentioned, a thin meat, and it can vary a little bit. We got another one here in size and shape, but they're basically sort of ovular shape. In French, it's kind of strange. In French, in France, they call this cut the bavette. And in French, bavette means bib. So it's kind of like a bib shape. It's super popular in France. There's restaurants that serve only flank steak, and they prepare it in a very traditional style, basically pan-seared and roasted. And then this one also, like a crowd pleaser, it serves up, you know, at a medium well, kind of well done and cut into medium rare, medium cut. And then they serve with sort of like a herb butter. An easy cut to prepare. We have a little bit of fat, perhaps, you know, we might want to address it just a little bit of connective tissue there too, on that sort of stem end. If we were thinking this is like being a bit of a leaf, we've got a bit of connective tissue. That'll be, you know, not a great eating experience. Thing about flank too is that, you know, it's really well suited for so many different cooking methods. I think the real appeal, or one of the great appeals of flank, is its flavor. And this is actually something too that is quite unique to beef, and Canadian beef in particular, is the range of flavors, textures, even aromas, colors of the meat, depending on the different parts of the carcass where it's taken from. So we've addressed this a little bit. Probably if we're going to try to start and cut some steaks, we would start there. This actually grills and roasts beautifully whole as well. And so, you know, we've addressed that grain direction. It's pretty clear to see in this cut. Take a little bit of that fat, but not too much. I'm going to trim here just a touch and square it off. We're going to take this one and make some steaks out of it. And I'm going to trim this just to square it off slightly. Hopefully you're following along here, those that are cutting. I made it a bit more square. Address any connective tissue. You can see the beauty of the work that the processors put to these products. You know, they really do take a lot of that labor out of our out of our hands, out of our kitchen. There's areas where you can save money on the product if you take that labor on yourself, but that's a challenging thing to do in a lot of cases to find folks with skills to work these cuts in-house. But with some of these trim bits, I can make soups and stocks. I can make burgers. If I've got a burger program, I can grind these bits of trim and incorporate that in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this into some steaks. I'm going to start about here. We're going to together cut along the length of that grain. You can see that very clearly in the flank. We'll cut it straight down the middle. And then working from one side to the other, we're going to cut ourselves a nice, say 4 or 5 ounce portion. Always, take a look at your product you're working with. Make sure you assess it carefully. If you're looking for your portions, make sure you can figure out how many you're going to get before you make those first cuts. We're going to make our first cut here. I'm going to get 3 lengths of portion from this piece of flank. A little bit of trim, but not much. Now we have beautiful little flank steaks. People love to marinate flank. They marinate it in balsamic, honey, herbs, otherwise Asian inspirations coming with a little bit of acid from lime juice or zest and lemon, ginger, soy sauce. There's a ton of opportunity with marination in this cut. And what I would suggest, if you do plan to marinate it and maybe grill and serve with a salad, we'll take our knife here and we'll practice this one together. We will just take that and make a nice even score pattern. Make it a little bit more than 1 centimeter, I would say 1.5 centimeters. And we're crossing that grain. We're going down to a depth of probably 3 millimeters. And we're just going to take time to make nice cuts because that's going to add presentation value if you serve this whole or if you carve it and slice it. No matter which way you do it, that marinade or rub that you infuse is going to penetrate more deeply into that flank steak and give you more of that flavor. We're going to do it on the other side as well, similarly. Nice and slow and steady, doing it together here. And just a little bit of weight on the knife. Only basically the weight of the knife is what you need to get that cut. And a sharp knife, of course. And as you get a little bit more comfortable, more skilled in practice, then of course you can go faster. We'll do it a couple more times here. Beautiful, rub that. What I was thinking, this was actually, I was gonna do this for the Santa Maria, but we didn't do a whole one. And the Santa Maria rub is, like I talked about, garlic and black pepper and herbs. And this one will leave that one whole. But what I was thinking, instead of Santa Maria rub, we're gonna make our own Canadian rub. So I'm gonna take the other half and make this this one would be great for a buffet, or if you were gonna be carving for a salad that you had on your menu, that you had a pretty good idea of how many you were gonna sell over the course of a lunch, let's say. We got music. I like it. That was cool. I hope you all got to enjoy that music too. There we go. We have a scored flank steak. I'm going to take this rub. What I did, instead of using the Santa Maria formula, I'm using the Caesar Rimmer, a Canadian beverage invented actually here in Calgary at the Caesar Steakhouse way back when. It must have been in the 60s or something. But instead of Santa Maria, a new innovation here today, we're going to use the Caesar rub. We've actually made Caesar rub with jerky, shredded jerky, dry beef jerky on top. And there we go. I've got just a few more minutes, and there's another cut I want to show you. And so we've rubbed that flank with the beautiful seasoning. It's going to pick up in those awesome hatch marks that we made, and we're going to show you that back here in a minute. Okay, Yoshi, may I have the Terrace Major Petite Tender, please? Okay, work clean, work smart, work safe. I remember those words from my instructor back at State. I always try to repeat those words myself before I begin any project, and I encourage you young professionals to do the same. All right, we're going to grab a couple of these. Beautiful. Thanks, Yoshi. Now, the last one here in the 5 minutes that we have. Terrace Major. So this is the petite tender coming from the beef chuck. This one is number 114 in that North American meat guide. It comes from it is called the shoulder tender, comes from the chuck of the animal, also known as the clod tender, petite tender. I think they also name it the bistro tender. This one has a Latin name that is kind of attractive. It's called the Terrace Major. So it also goes by Terrace Major. Unlike the flank steak, rectus abdominis, it has an attractive name. So they use it to market it. So, you know, you can get creative in how you market your products on your menus. So this is probably one of the easiest cuts to work with. I did trim it down just a little bit this morning, but this is like direct from the processor, nicely cleaned up, beautiful lean meat. This is one of the easiest, most delicious, most tender cuts on the carcass, and not very well known. Starting to gain in popularity. This is what I did to clean it up a bit this morning. I just removed a bit of it. So the bistro tender or Terrace Major, petite tender, it's awesome. It's its own whole little roast, or it's also potential for medallions. There's also a technique. See if I've got a minute here to show you, but to take these two, this is something that I learned from a retail merchandiser, where you can take these two pieces and basically tie them together. You find sort of like their fat end and their skinny end, and you can take that together and tie it up so that you've got sort of a double wide Terrace Major. And that can be merchandised, and even I think probably even for food service. And we would tie the length of it and then cut into medallions. That's one option with the Terrace Major. I'll make a quick cut here to show you what it looks like. Now we have a double wide medallion, because otherwise it's a relatively small medallion steak, but like this, now a nice portion size. Very, very tender. It eats really rich. It has an awesome depth of flavor, and it's a very easy product to introduce to the menu, either as a whole roast, a small or shareable roast. This could be like a baby Chateaubriand kind of thing. And we're going to set that one aside, and then I'll show you just a few more quick medallions. Cuts beautifully. You can tell how tender it is. And little medallions. You can also, you know, with some attention and some skill and a little bit of patience and I guess learning this, we could actually take this and also do a butterfly. And then stuff and then roll, like we did with the double there. And then we could apply our stuffing. We'll call it the Santa Maria alternative, our Caesar brimmer marinade. And we could roll that up and also tie it. Okay, we've covered a fair bit, and I want to leave at least a couple minutes or maybe one for questions. I will put this over here, and I will hand it to you, Sabrina. Thank you.
Chef Mathieu, that was incredible. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I learned a ton. Really also fascinating, from the Canadian beef advantage to the cuts that you showed, the opportunity cuts, really just so great. Thank you so much. To our guests, I don't have anything in the chat. I think everybody was as captivated by the demonstration as I was. So I don't have any comments in the chat section. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them in there, or just turn your mic on and, you know, just shout them out. Yeah,
It's,
let's see.
it's my pleasure. I thank you guys, and I thank you for following along and doing the cut along. It's something that we've not yet done before here at Canada Beef. It's been such a pleasure to do it, and looking for hopefully to get some feedback too, and see if we can make this different or better. More cuts, fewer cuts, more time. You know, we are excited to do this. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings us to the end. There's no questions at the moment. Again, I think you really did such a great job for covering everything. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to email me and I'll put you in touch with Chef Mathieu and we can go about it that way. I'll also be sharing the link to this video so you can share it with your peers and your students. And the links that Chef Mathieu had included in his presentation, I'll make those available to everybody as well. Yes, so again, I learned a ton. I'm so excited to get in the kitchen myself to try some of these cuts. I think that, you know, these opportunity cuts, you don't see them very often, but there's a lot of value you can tell from understanding, again, these opportunities to really utilize the full animal. So thank you again so much. And thank you to our guests on behalf of Taste Canada and Canada Beef for attending and joining us today. Yeah, we look forward to doing this again in the future. If there's ever another topic that you'd like to learn more about, please just let us know. And we love doing this. And as Chef Mathieu said, they have this beautiful facility at the Canadian Beef Center of Excellence, just suited up for this kind of information sharing. So yeah, please just let us know. And again, thank you to everybody. Thank you to Chef Mathieu and your team there for hosting us and sharing all of this expertise. It was really, really great.
Thanks, Yoshi. Yeah, thank you again. Such a pleasure. There's so much opportunity, and I really want to encourage the students, the chefs to be, you know, really dig into information, dig into opportunities to explore product and become a source of knowledge for, and not just for yourself, but for your teammates in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Well, again, everybody, thank you for coming. It was very enjoyable, and we'll all be in touch and, you know, work safe, work clean, and work delicious. So thank you again to everybody. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Take good
Take care,
care.
everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.